I want to talk to a former colleague of mine, Dr. Enrique Rivera from the United States, former colleague of mine on RT America, because he's written a very important book. It's called The Untold History of Capitalism. Let's hear what he has to say about that book. Dr. Enrique, thank you for joining us. Why untold? As far as I know, all the history I've ever been taught was the history of capitalism. What is there that is untold?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, all the history of the modern world is really the history of capitalism, right? But unfortunately, it's only a relative few, especially in the West, that get to hear the real history. As far as what's untold in this, I think there's two original arguments here. One is, well, first of all, we talk about capitalism, we throw the term around rather loosely, and I think we do this across the political spectrum, you know. But we don't kind of sit down and ask, well, what is capitalism? What makes our contemporary economic system different from the previous ones that have existed in human history? And so one of the things I do is I say, hey, look, you know, we got to look back at what the definition is. And so I go back to that. And I think in order to do that, you have to go back to Marx, who I think really hit the nail on the head. Historically speaking, he was able to really say, you know, what makes this contemporary or modern economic system different from the previous ones. And then I say, well, but, you know, Marx is great, but Marx's time period that he came up with, he says the dawn of capitalism is in the 16th century. But when I go through the investigation in my book, which is really a micro history, so I'm looking at this little local story and I'm trying to really hone in on it to tell a much wider, bigger story. In this case, the history of capitalism, as big as the story can get. What I find is actually capitalist production developed much, much later than Marx presumed, and as many historians, whether they're Marxists or not, have also concluded. And so I think that's one important aspect that hasn't really been told. The other aspect of the book is that I talk about the story that I'm honing in on is an anti-slavery rebellion. It's an anti-colonial rebellion as well. It's in Venezuela in 1795. In Venezuela, this is a really big deal. This is a precursor to Simón Bolívar's Wars of Independence. Afro-Venezuelan Month in Venezuela is in commemoration of this rebellion. In the West, we don't know that much about it. But you know, historians tend to credit kind of, during this period in the late 18th century, 1790s, et cetera, early 1800s, you see this explosion of anti-slavery rebellions by enslaved people all over the place, all over the Caribbean, all over the Americas. Sugar fields, cotton plantations are being burned to the ground all over the place.
But capitalism doesn't imply slavery. It's a different kind of slavery, maybe. Capitalism, slavery emerged in a pre-capitalist era, long before capitalism, and in fact is an affront to capitalism, which wants everybody to be a consumer, everybody to be a market. And of course, if large numbers of people are enslaved, they don't have money by definition, they can't be a consumer.
Exactly. Enslaved people are bad consumers. And so even though slavery could be an extremely profitable enterprise, and it certainly was at the time, its potential is really, really limited. You know, you can't sell an iPhone to someone who doesn't make an income. And the kind of the brilliance of capitalism is that they're able to, what it does is it forces us to become consumers. In order to survive, we have to purchase our necessities. Our necessities are put in the market as commodities. So whether it's food, drink, or housing, or clothes, right? But as history progresses, as countries develop economically, those subsistence needs, those things that we need to do to survive, increase rapidly. And so, we didn't need an iPhone 10 years ago, right? And I mean, try to hold the job without a smartphone. It's a difficult thing to do today. And so that's the thing with slavery, is that although it was enormously profitable, there really wasn't that potential that you find under capitalism.
It had no future, no. I mean, I come from the country, Scotland, where the first real theorist of capitalism, Adam Smith, also came from. I think that if Adam Smith was here today, he would not describe what we have today as capitalism in the way that he defined it. I was talking earlier to a guest about the state expenditure, for example, through the pandemic. Some people say there are no socialist countries anymore, not purely socialist anyway. But there are not actually any purely capitalist countries anymore, are there? There are sections of the economy that remain owned by the state. State expenditure is absolutely indispensable. Capitalism in Britain would have collapsed if not for the state over the last 18 months, 2 years of the pandemic. Companies don't go to the wall if they fail. They get nationalized like the banks in 2008. None of these are really capitalist things, are they?
Well, see, I think that's where where Marx departs from Smith, and that Smith, I think, frankly, was wrong. He had this idea of the modern economic system as being completely divorced from the state, and it was completely in the hands of private hands, and that's where it needed to be. The truth is, and Marx knew this well, and I think we've known this for quite some time, is that the state has been intricately involved in capitalist development. There is no capitalism without the state. Before, if we look way back, right, and if we look at Scotland, for example, I don't know that history totally. I know England a little better, but let's say England in the 18th century, there are people who are they're small farmers, basically peasants, and they live off the land and they pay their tax to the feudal lord or whatever. Well, you have to get those people off of the land so that they can work for a wage, so that they can work for these new industries. And the way that you do that is you get a state to do it. So you get the state to come in and say, hey, this isn't your land anymore. This is our land. These aren't, you can't use those tools anymore. We're going to use these tools. And so from capitalism's birth, from its genesis, the state has always been intricately involved. And that's been the case ever since. This myth, this idea that is espoused, that limited state interference is what has driven economic development, is just a flat out lie. There's actually no historical basis for that position. In fact, states have been, if you look at the most recent economic success stories, it's because there's very, very involved state planning, and they're able to basically tell private capital where they're going to be doing their thing.
Well, they certainly do that in China. I mean, you could argue that the most successful capitalist country in the world right now is China, and that's because it has a strong state which has a guiding role, plays a guiding role in the development of the economy. Maybe we should all model our economy on the Chinese economy.
I think you're certainly right. China is a huge success story, and especially for the underdeveloped countries. And this thing that is being shoved down the poor countries' necks, the IMF restructuring, these are completely antithetical to economic development. Yes, China is a capitalist country. Its economy is capitalist. It's run by a communist party who has carefully planned its economic development. And this gets to, and I think that, people on the left, where I find myself, don't really like to hear these sorts of things. But the truth is that capitalism can be used as a way to uplift the standards of living for a population that is trapped in generational poverty, like is the case in the underdeveloped world. And so China has done that quite brilliantly. I think you see Vietnam doing it now as well. Cuba would love to do it. Cuba is the next success story. If only they could get over this pesky blockade. And I think that's why the United States doesn't want to do it, because I think the world would change if that blockade was lifted over Cuba.
Well, good luck with the book, Dr. Rivera, The Untold History of Capitalism. How do people get it?
Well, it's available online. You can get it through the publisher, International Publishers. It's on Amazon as well. Jeff Bezos, I don't think, likes the book because they keep selling out of it, and they won't buy more copies from the publisher. So if you put it on your list on Amazon, it'll get to you soon.